Today, we're gonna touch on a very well-known and interesting story that took place in 2018 in Northern Thailand. The whole world watched the rescue operation in real time, and several movies and Netflix series, books, and dozens of hours of podcasts have been created. The story is truly astounding. If this were a work of fiction, one could accuse the author of exaggerating, since such things hardly ever happen in real life. This is, however, a true story. Tham Luang Nang Nong is a karstic cave system located under the mountain range Doi Nang Nong in the province of Chiang Rai on the border between Thailand and Myanmar. Its many narrow passages stretch for 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles, often becoming completely flooded during the monsoon season, which lasts from July to November. Legend has it that the mountain range above the caves is called Mountain of the Sleeping Lady because of its shape and the local belief that it is home to the spirit of a princess. According to this legend, a princess fell in love with a stable boy and hid with him in the caves as her father had ordered the boy's death. One day, the stable boy left the cave to search for food and was killed by the king's man. Having found out about this, the princess committed suicide. Her spirit is said to cry inconsolably, which is what makes the cave fill with water. As you will know if you've been to Thailand or ever taken an interest in it, many of the country's inhabitants believe in spirits and local gods. So for them, the legend of the sleeping lady is not just a pretty fairy tale. Tham Luang is considered a challenging cave even for professional cavers due to the multitude of narrow tunnels and impasses. There is even a sign at its entrance warning people to abstain from visiting the cave during the rainy season. An unprepared person might easily get lost and drown. Nevertheless, the cave is a popular tourist destination. On July 23, 2018, 12 members of the Wild Boars junior soccer team, together with their assistant coach Akafon Kantawong, Ak for short, were practicing. The boys were aged 11 to 16 and were all close friends, and Ak, though only 25 years old himself, saw the boys pretty much as his own. Ak was an orphan and had spent 12 years of his life in a Buddhist monastery before starting his soccer career. These were simple boys from fairly poor families, and 3 of them, as well as the assistant coach, had no nationality. The reason for this is that the region has no clear borders and is home to many tribes that are not assigned passports. One of the problems that created was traveling to matches outside the province. After some successful practice, the team decided to go for a short hike in the caves, something they did fairly often. This time, however, they had a special reason to go there. It was the 16th birthday of one of the boys, Knight. They had even bought $22 worth of food, a considerable sum. But even without the upcoming birthday, the coach was planning to go with the boys on a small adventure after practice. Visiting caves was a frequent pastime for the team, but they had never been in this particular one in spite of its popularity. They arrived at the cave on bikes, parked them at the entrance, and went in. Some entered the cave barefoot. They were used to not wearing shoes, and the coach had advised them to take only the minimum of belongings so as to decrease the risk of getting stuck in the particularly narrow parts of the cave. The team wanted to reach the part of the cave that is known as the Underwater City and write their names on its wall, which was considered a sort of ritual of initiation. The boys were playing and joking around, failing to notice the water that was gathering at their feet. Some of the boys became peckish, but since they had left most of their things outside, there wasn't much in terms of snacks, and the team decided it was time to turn back. They had been in the cave for over an hour. When they turned around and walked part of the way back, in the place of a narrow passage that led to the exit, they found a bubbling bowl of brownish water. How could this be? They decided to send Ak out to explore. A rope was tied to his waist and he dove into the icy, murky waters. His job was to make sure the boys could swim behind him and find a way out. But he nearly drowned trying to find his way out in the dark. Water had filled the entire entrance to the cave. The boys would have to go deeper into the cave in the hope that the water wouldn't get that far, and that this flooding was a temporary occurrence. They went back to a spot behind that was called Pattaya Beach, hoping the water levels would decrease by morning. Outside, it had started to rain. The forecast had not predicted this. Ak had checked it and knew that the rainy season wasn't projected to begin until 2 weeks later. But the weather changed drastically. Knight's unsuspecting mother was busy preparing his birthday party, but time passed, the ice cream cake was melting, and yet the boy did not return home. Starting to worry, she called the team's head coach, No Parrot, who told her that everything was okay. They were just boys being boys, so one should let them play some more. The mother's heart did not rest, however, so she called the other parents and found out that the other players hadn't come home either. The head coach didn't know where the boys had gone that day, but he managed to contact the 13th member of the team who did not join the hike after practice. The boy told No Parrot that the team was supposed to go on an adventure in the cave. When the parents found out about this, terror gripped them. The head coach and later several parents went to the entrance of the cave where they found the team's bikes and bags as well as Knight's flip-flops, which were floating in water. That's when everyone realized that something horrible had happened. There was no way to contact the children. There was no mobile network inside the cave, and without it, no way of knowing if the team was even alive. The Sunday morning of June 24th saw some 50 people gather at the cave. 20 volunteers tried to dive into the flooded tunnels but failed to do so because of strong currents. Soon, professional divers from the Sericon diving team arrived, but refused to venture inside because the water levels continued to rise. The rescuers, who had already started working with the governor of Chiang Rai province, called British caver Vern Unsworth, who had detailed knowledge of the cave complex and was in Thailand at the time. Vern would become the face of the rescue operation, giving interviews and explaining details about the cave to journalists. Soon, Vern arrived at the spot. 2 o'clock Sunday morning, I got a call to say, "Children are missing in Tham Luang. Can you come and help?" So I just basically drove straight to Tham Luang that morning. The flood waters have actually come through 3 to 4 weeks earlier. To be honest, the children and the coach were just very, very unlucky. Unsworth was the first to conclude that the team was probably in the part of the cave known as Pattaya Beach. It was on the most popular route through the cave system and water wouldn't have reached it yet. Or at least everyone hoped it hadn't. A worrying fact was that even Vern, with all his experience, had never seen such heavy rain. Monday, June 25th. The governor of Chiang Rai and Unsworth decided to call for help and summoned a group of 20 Thai Navy SEALs, the best divers in the country. They decided to make camp in the cave's third chamber, which at that point was not completely flooded. They managed to dive in for a short period of time, but were unable to find the boys that day. Being Navy SEALs, the team, though strong and brave, did not have adequate experience in cave diving. They had trained in rivers and the sea, which required completely different skills. Even their diving suits were made for warm seawater and not for the icy, dirty cave waters. Vern understood this and continued his search for more suitable divers. Cave diving is not very well developed in Thailand, where ocean diving is more common, so Vern had to convince the government to accept help from foreign professionals. Tuesday, June 26th. Vern Unsworth wrote a letter to the provincial governor. There were 3 names in it: Rob Harper, Rick Stannon, John Valentin. They were the best cavers that Vern knew, and he believed that they were the only ones who could save the boys. The British and American embassies in Thailand got involved, with diplomats occasionally even staying the night in their offices in order to find the quickest way to get the professionals into the cave. At this point, the entrance to Tham Luang had already become a magnet to journalists from all over the country, as well as volunteers from the neighboring villages. Some cooked, some brought in food, some helped build awnings to protect from the rain. Everyone wanted to have some part in the rescue operation. On June 26th, the third cave chamber where the military divers made camp, became almost completely flooded. The governor sent in volunteers to pump out some of the water, but to no avail. Never before had Thailand faced such a grand rescue operation, so they had to search for new pumps and involve more and more people in the effort. Water pumping companies offered their services for free and bought new pumps for the rescue. Everyone who had some spare resources used them to aid the stranded boys. Thailand's foreign minister finally called British divers Richard Stanton and John Volanthen. Stanton's girlfriend was from Thailand, and she had already told him about the cave incident, so he was awaiting a call from the highest Thai officials. After all, caving is not just a type of scuba diving, it is a completely different sort of activity, and there exists only a handful of caving professionals in the whole world. Wednesday, June 27th. While divers were trying to reach the children via the water-filled tunnels, locals attempted to find another entrance to the cave from above, on the side of the mountain. The rescue team examined every cleft, every crack in the rocks. Many realized that such reckless dedication might lead to tragedy. The cracks leading into the cave were very narrow, had very little air, and were often dead ends. We took the coordinates and asked locals who know the area and who know where the shafts are to be our guides. We hiked for over 20 kilometers a day. Every minute we hiked in there, the only thought was how to get the boys out as fast as we could. This is how the head of the group recounted their efforts. In spite of the danger, they climbed down every cleft in the hope of finding a new way inside the cave. They also used sniffer dogs, hoping that they would be able to track the scent of those trapped inside. Meanwhile, the divers below were facing more and more hardship. The heavy rain continued, and the third chamber relentlessly filled with water. Here are the recollections of Anand Suravan, head of the military diver team. On Wednesday, while we were working in Chamber 3, I heard a grinding sound the whole time. I felt the cave shaking. Water was pouring in, chamber by chamber. Talking about it makes me shudder. We were in danger. The same day saw the arrival of the renowned British divers whom Vern Unsworth had mentioned in his letter. When Richard Stanton was brought to the spot, he was astonished at how many people there were around. The driver who had taken him to the cave was overjoyed at who his passenger was and even asked for a photo taken out at Best Divers in the World banner. The area before the cave was a chaotic place. Nobody was properly ready for the arrival of professional cavers and didn't really know what to do with them. Vern Unsworth welcomed the newcomers and informed them of the situation. The cave was flooded nearly to the very entrance, and the currents inside were so strong that the crashing of the water was deafening. Several pumps had already been installed, and they at least kept the water away from the entrance itself. They worked non-stop, and the pumped-out water had to be dumped on the neighboring fields, ruining the crops. In total, over 2,000 square kilometers or 1,240 square miles of fields belonging to 101 farmers were flooded. Sri Tamachoki was one of those who had to sacrifice her fields for the rescue cause. I was working in the paddy field when the village head announced that the children trapped in the cave could not be found unless the water in the cave was drained out. I was worried every day that the children could not make it out of the cave. I could not eat or sleep. What would us farmers do? Would we allow the water to be diverted here? I said, empty the water here. If the water reached the children, they would be dead. If the paddy fields were flooded, we could replant the rice. When I saw my paddy field, my heart sank. Still, I felt sorry for the children. I wanted them out safely. The government offered to compensate us with money and seeds, but I did not take the money. I felt bad for the government. They spent a lot of money already. The whole world had truly come together to help the boys whose fate still remained unknown. Women from nearby villages bought and prepared food for the rescuers. Thai and American soldiers arrived on the spot to help out. The despairing parents spent day and night beside the cave, wiping away tears, praying and making sacrifices to the spirit of the princess in the mountain, believing it was her who had trapped the boys. Nearly 1,500 reporters from all over the world arrived at the cave. No more was the rescue operation a local Thai affair. Now, the whole world was watching. Sunday, July 1st. The group searching for new entrances to the cave came to the conclusion that their efforts were in vain. This meant only one thing: the sole way to the boys lay through the flooded main entrance. The rescuers understood that even if the boys were found alive, getting them out of the cave would be very difficult. Some of them didn't even know how to swim. While inside the 10-kilometer or 6-mile long cave, there must have been areas untouched by water. It was also obvious that some of the fully submerged tunnels could be up to 200 meters or 1,000 feet long. Such distances can only be managed with a professional diver with a scuba. Stanton and Valentham made their first dives at a time when the cave was closed off even for army divers. So dangerous was the situation. Both men understood the risks. There were many electric cables in the water to power lighting and various equipment, so there was always the danger of being electrocuted. Besides, there was a lot of debris floating in the water, whereas Stanton had a penchant for handmade diving equipment, modifying hoses, reworking fixings, trusting only himself. However, if the water is filled with assorted debris, then diving using handmade equipment is dangerous. What if the floating objects pierce his makeshift hoses? Nonetheless, the men decided to go in. On their first dive, they made an astonishing discovery. As they reached the first air pocket, they found 4 men who became trapped in the cave after the rescue operation had already begun. Nobody had thought of them. While rescuing them, the divers had to share their oxygen and hope the men wouldn't panic. This was when it became clear that rescuing the boys would be even more difficult than they had expected. Now they were rescuing 4 grown men, and even they panicked upon glimpsing the exit. Stanton had to grab one of them by the neck to get him out. It was a grueling affair. "People are gonna get killed," Stanton said that day. The 2 Britons were almost about to leave, not believing that they could ever reach the boys. They were convinced to stay for several more days. The rain had stopped for a short while, and thanks to the use of pumps, the water levels inside the cave finally started dropping. Monday, July 2nd. Thai army divers started laying ropes underwater to be able to return to the 3rd chamber in case the children were found. Laying the ropes was a lengthy process, and Valentin and Stanton in the end decided not to wait and went searching for the boys on their own. The Thai divers asked them to take some rope with them and lay it on their way. The Brits agreed. They had a long journey ahead of them, several hours underwater with a strong current, but they progressed firmly, laying the rope along the way. Only a short piece of it was left when they reached an air pocket. This was an unflooded part of the cave just beyond the area known as Pattaya Beach. Richard removed his mask and took a breath. The air was foul, smelling of human excrement. There were people somewhere around. He raised his flashlight and saw 2 eyes glistening in the distance. A small boy was making his way through the rocks towards them. It was one of the lost boys. This moment was caught on camera.
How many of you? 13. Brilliant.
One by one, the boys appeared before the divers, thin and tired. They were very surprised that divers from faraway Britain had come to save them. Only one of the boys, Adul, spoke English, so he interpreted for the others. The boys were hungry and cold, but generally in good health and high spirits. And most importantly, all of them were alive. They had already spent 10 days trapped in the cave. They knew which day it was because one of the boys had a watch that showed not only time but also the date. Here's how Adul recalled his encounter with the divers. "I was stunned because they were English, so I said hello. They asked how are you? So I said I'm okay. I asked if they wanted any help, and they said no and told me to go back up. Then he said, how many of you?" The divers hadn't brought enough food and water for the boys, since they didn't expect to find them this time. Therefore, there was no point in them staying for long. They had to return as quickly as possible to tell the world that the boys were alive and well. At 10 p.m., the divers finally surfaced in the third chamber and told their colleagues that the boys had been found. Pattaya Beach, which was where the divers had thought they were hiding, had been flooded, but they survived by hiding behind a rock 400 meters further away. All this time, the boys drank the water that trickled down the walls and stalactites. They had no food. They had hoped so much to arrive at Knight's birthday party, eat some cake, eat at least something. After several days of confinement, their flashlights began running out of power. They used them one at a time so that there would always be just a bit of light. Occasionally, they heard the crowing of roosters, laughter, and saw odd shadows. They thought this was the work of the mountain spirits, but it was most likely the cave itself making noises as it was affected by the flooding. Rocks fell in the water somewhere far away, and the sound became distorted as it reflected from the walls. So that the boys wouldn't lose their minds from the darkness and the fear, their coach decided to approach their predicament as yet another training session. He told them to sit on the ground and close their eyes. Then they had to listen to their breath, thinking only about inhaling and exhaling, observing how their breath slowed down, feeling how air passed through the nose into the lungs. This was meditation. Ak used to meditate a lot when he was a monk at a Buddhist temple, so he taught the boys how to meditate too. This helped them keep a calm and clear mind. To keep up the children's hopes of rescue, their trainer decided to give them something to do. Ak understood that there was only one exit and it was flooded, but what the boys needed was hope. So he suggested they start digging a passage towards the outside world. They engaged in this regularly as long as they had the strength. Physical activity also helped keep their mental state stable. Nevertheless, by the 10th day without food, they were exhausted. Thankfully, they had drinkable water which was dripping down the cave walls. It was relatively clean, having been filtered through many layers of earth and sand, but that was of course not nearly enough. Another problem was that the chamber they were in was very close to being airtight, bringing the danger of suffocation. After the boys were found, a group of 7 military divers was sent in. Using the laid ropes, which were supposed to make their journey quicker and safer, they reached the boys and gave them some water and sweet jellies. It took the group about 5 hours, however, to reach the stranded team. They had a doctor with them, and this was his first time diving, so he and the 3 other divers used up nearly all of their oxygen on the way there, meaning that they too had to stay with the boys. Tuesday, July 3rd. The divers, the army, and the provincial administration officials began planning the rescue operation. The situation was getting more and more dire because the rain had started again, flooding the cave even further. At first, they considered 2 options. The first one was to teach the boys how to dive and have them swim out of the cave on their own. The second one was wait till the end of the rainy season, supplying the boys with food and water. As you can understand, neither of these options was perfect or even tenable. Teaching exhausted children to dive in icy murky waters in total darkness when some of them can't even swim. I myself at first considered this option viable as I was watching the Netflix show about this case. I don't have children and have never tried diving, so I thought that there was probably not that much to it. You give them some oxygen and have them swim along a rope. What's the big deal? But then I imagined myself in the place of an 11-year-old boy, as fearless as they might be. After nearly 2 weeks in the cave without food and heat, the boys would have been emaciated. They certainly would not have the strength to swim and push their way through the narrow passages of the cave. Moreover, there is always our innate fear of the dark and of small spaces, which can induce panic even among the most experienced divers. The second option, waiting out the rainy season, also had to be thrown out. The rain could continue for many months, and during all that time, divers would have to risk their lives supplying the team with food and water. And what if somebody should fall ill? The youngest boy already had pneumonia, and several others had a severe cough. How could one hold them in there for another whole month or two? In their search for options, the divers even ended up arguing with each other, since some of them thought that the mission was doomed to be deadly. There was no way they could bring everyone out alive. In the end, they decided on the first option, having the boys swim to freedom themselves. The expected death rate was 50 to 80%. Wednesday, July 4th. The group of British divers collected information from the boys concerning their condition and who should be taken out of the cave first. The oxygen levels inside the cave were at 15%, and anything under 19% is considered dangerous. The good news was that the divers managed to lay an oxygen pipe to where the team was stranded, but this wasn't a permanent solution. Each boy was also given one military lunch a day. These supplies were to last 5 to 7 days. The divers simply couldn't take more weight with them. Meanwhile, there were 4 grown men now stranded together with the boys. The doctor examined them, gave them medicine, and played checkers with them, having drawn the game board on the ground. Thursday, July 5th. The divers started placing oxygen tanks in air pockets along the way for the upcoming operation. The details of the extraction plan were classified. The rescue teams didn't want anyone to get in their way, and besides, some of their decisions could have scared the boys' families. The Thai government signed off on the plan even if it wasn't safe. Friday, July 6th. 2 military divers were out placing oxygen tanks along the way when they disappeared for a whole 15 hours. They couldn't be contacted, so it was impossible to understand what had happened. After 15 hours, one of the divers returned asking for help. His colleague was out of oxygen. When the other divers found him, Sergeant Saman Gunan was already dead. The fresh oxygen cylinder arrived too late to save him. He gave his life doing everything he could to save the boys. At the time, Saman had already retired from the military and was working at an airport. He had volunteered to help out with the rescue. He was a husband and father, a great athlete and true professional. When they lifted Sergeant Saman's body out of the water, I didn't want to look because I understood that there had been a loss of life. The loss of his life actually pushed us to try to accomplish the mission, to not give up, his commander recalled. I am very sad that Saman lost his life. That really brought home how dangerous the operation was, Vern Unsworth said. Saman's death brought the rescue team closer together. Everyone knew that there was no way they could fail the rescue mission. Otherwise, his death would have been for nothing. It is unclear what exactly happened to him underwater, but the first death in the cave made the army and the divers consider safer ways of saving the boys. After all, how could one hope that they could swim underwater for several hours when an experienced and well-trained adult had died in the process? Here's how one of the divers, Jason Mallinson, recounts the situation. The first thought is, they're not gonna get out. I mean, the kids. We've done recoveries before with live people, and it's not about panic underwater. You can tell a kid whatever you want, but in an actual situation, when you've got a kid underwater, they're more likely to panic. So at first, we thought it's not possible to actually dive them out. Saturday, July 7th. After 2 weeks in the cave, the team finally got an opportunity to send messages to their families that were waiting for them at the entrance to the cave. One of the divers had a wet notepad with him and gave it to the boys. Knight, the boy who had celebrated his birthday in the cave, wrote to his family that he was fine and asked them to remember his birthday. I'm fine. It is a little bit cold, but don't worry. Please don't forget my birthday. Jason Mallinson recalls, they all seem to be in good spirits. Where they are, it is a quite desolate place and they've nowhere to go. They go to the toilet there, they got to eat there, so the smell is quite bad. It's quite warm. The first day myself and Chris went through to orientate ourselves with the cave and visited them and chatted with them. Like I said, They had the 4 Navy SEALs in there, so they had somebody to look after them, who took them gifts and letters from the parents, and we brought messages back, so it was quite a good experience for them and us to pass on messages from the outside world. Here are some of those messages. Mom and Dad, I love you. If I can get out, please take me out to eat crispy pork. I am happy. The SEAL team is taking care of us very well. I miss you all. I really want to get out so much. Please tell grandmother to make pork crackling with dipping sauce for me. I will go and eat when I get out. Love you all. The team's coach also handed over a message. He felt very guilty before the boys' parents. Dear all parents, we are fine. The rescue team is taking care of us very well. I promise that I will take best care of the boys. Thanks for all your support, and I apologize to all parents. The world's most experienced divers from places as far apart as Australia, China, and England arrived at the cave. They included Dr. Richard Harris and his diving partner Craig Challen. Richard devised a plan that was supposed to keep the boys from panicking during the extraction, render them unconscious with anesthetic. Initially, this plan seemed even more far-fetched than the other two. Put them under in a cave and drag them for miles underwater like they were some sack. However, if the idea of teaching them to dive carried an 80% risk of death, this plan gave hope for the rescue of at least half of the team. The government and the boys' families agreed to the anesthesia. Dr. Harris would administer them with a shot of ketamine before diving, dress them in a full face mask, bind their hands and feet so they couldn't get tangled in the equipment, and slowly drag them to the cave entrance. This journey would take at least 5 hours for each boy, meaning the divers would have to administer top-up ketamine injections while they were in the water. Oxygen tanks had been placed on the way, and there were also air pockets where the divers could catch their breath if needed. A group of 18 divers would be involved in the operation. They had to refer to the boys only as package or cargo, lest any emotions or paternal feelings surge when they see them. This would help keep them and other team members safe, minimizing the desire to take unnecessary risks. Should the mask come off or the package start moving, they were to continue their journey. Surviving and pulling out at least one boy alive would already be a miracle. The boys were also given a choice to wait for the water levels to drop or be taken out under anesthesia. All agreed to be rescued under anesthesia. They wanted to go back home to their parents. They were really strong. We told them about the plan in vague details. The plan that we'd have to dive them out, and none of them were whimpering or crying or anything. They just accepted what we're gonna do. Real mental strength from them, which is really surprising considering their ages, Jason Mallinson recalls. It was decided that the first to go would be the boys who lived the farthest away from the cave, since they would have to ride their bikes back home to tell everyone of their adventure. At least, this was the version that the boys were told. In actual fact, however, the divers chose the strongest boys who had better chances of surviving should something go wrong along the way. The boys really believed that when they were finally freed, they would have to ride back home on the bikes they had left at the entrance to the cave. At the time, they had no idea that their story had become known around the world, and that when they were rescued, the only place they would go to was the hospital to recover. The boys' school friends helped the divers to find the right masks. They tried on all the equipment and even practiced being cargo with their hands and feet tied, but without anesthesia. Parents wrote letters to their children. Buddhist monks arrived on the scene. They gave offerings to the spirit of the mountain in hope of mollifying the princess. Sunday, July 8th, first day of the rescue operation. In the morning of July 8th, the extraction officially began. The governor of the province held a press conference where he disclosed the plans. Today, we're at the peak of readiness. It's D-Day. At 10 a.m., 13 professional divers entered the cave to carry out the extraction of the kids, including 5 Navy SEALs. They have been clearly briefed on how the extraction would be carried out. I can confirm that all 13, the children and coach, are ready health-wise and in good spirits. All 13 are aware of our operation and are ready for this. They're ready to come out no matter what difficulties they may face. The soccer team was in good spirits and psychologically well prepared. At 1 p.m., the divers entered the water. The media, family members, and volunteers were asked to clear the area around the cave entrance. The international team was led by 4 British divers, John Volanthen, Richard Stanton, Jason Mallinson, and Chris Jewell, alongside 2 Australians, Craig Challen and Richard Harris, diver and anesthesiologist. The visibility in the water was extremely poor since it had collected all the dirt from the cave walls and was made worse by the divers stirring it up with their flippers. In addition to the ketamine that would render them unconscious, the boys were also injected with anti-anxiety drugs to stabilize their heart rate. One after one, the divers dressed the boys in wetsuits, secured masks on their faces, and attached a cylinder of 80% oxygen to their stomachs. On Sunday, rescuers hoped to retrieve 4 boys and return for the others the next day. The worst thing that could happen would be one of those guys panicking, and if you put me in a full face mask with no previous experience and drag me out of a cave for a 3-hour trip, then I would be terrified and probably panicking as well, Australian diver Craig Challen recounted. The first cargo was underwater. According to different sources, it took from 5 to 8 hours to bring it to the entrance, with at least 2 divers guiding it at all times. They arrived at the entrance at 5:40 p.m. Once the boy was unpacked and his mask taken off, the doctors started listening for a heartbeat. There was one. The sense of relief that everyone felt at that moment was indescribable. The plan was working. The footage taken on that day shows how the rescuers hand the stretchers with the boys over to each other. All 4 boys who were taken that day emerged from the cave alive, in spite of an incident when one of them woke up in the middle of extraction. They were immediately taken to hospital where they would spend 10 days. They would have to wear sunglasses and get used to the light of day. Meanwhile, the operation wasn't anywhere near being over. The rest of the boys and their coach were still trapped in the cave, and their condition was getting worse. Moreover, the forecast showed that soon there would be new heavy rainfall, one that the pumps installed at the entrance probably wouldn't be able to manage. Monday, July 9th, second day of the rescue operation. "Don't worry, son, you're on your way home," repeated Rasmussen, one of the divers, to each boy as they passed through his arms. On Monday, the spirit of the cave was benevolent towards the rescuers. Another 4 boys saw the light of day. At 8 p.m., they were taken to the hospital. 4 more boys and their trainer remained in the cave. The rescuers worried that their success so far was only a stroke of luck and that something might happen the next day. They had to be as alert as ever. Tuesday, July 10th. The weather was taking a turn for the worse. The divers were exhausted both physically and emotionally. One of the main pumps had stopped working, so they had to move quickly. One after one, they retrieved the boys. The youngest one was the last to be rescued because his mask was too big for him. They simply don't manufacture diving masks that would be small enough for him. Nobody hoped to see him alive. Due to rising water levels, diver Chris Jewell had to surface in an air pocket to refasten his mask and hand the boy over to Dr. Harris, since the diver himself had no strength left to continue dragging the boy along. The last stranded boy was freed on July 10th at 6:47 p.m., having spent 18 days in the cave. In mere hours after the last diver left the cave, it became completely submerged in muddy brown water. They were extremely lucky. It seems that the cave spirit showed them mercy, having seen the teamwork of people from all across the world. The boys and their coach had a lengthy recuperation process ahead of them. They hadn't sustained any injuries except for a few bruises and respiratory infections. Nonetheless, at first, even relatives weren't allowed to visit. The doctors were worried about the state of their immune system. The families had to look at their sons through a glass barrier. Thankfully, the boys were recovering quickly. They started eating and felt quite well. In the hospital, they found out that many people all across the world were following the story of their rescue. They also enjoyed visits from the divers. We went to see them. Words cannot describe how happy we were. It honestly was not a result that we thought we would get. We thought there was a very real prospect that we would be doing body recoveries rather than live patient extractions from there. And as I say, I'm still pinching myself a little bit, wondering if that's really what happened. It seemed too good to be true, Craig Challen recalls. The parents didn't know how to thank the brave divers. Overjoyed, they hugged them and made offerings to the spirit of the princess that allegedly inhabits the cave. The boys were checked out of the hospital after 9 days. Once the boys got better and found out that the whole world had been following their story, they became Thailand's national heroes. The wild boars returned to their families, hugged their loved ones, and finally enjoyed the food that they had dreamt of in the cave. Abdul, who had interpreted for the divers, had KFC chicken. It was what motivated him to get out of the cave alive. 4 of the boys had celebrated their birthdays in the cave. After the rescue, the parties were repeated. The team and their coach gave numerous interviews. At some point, they were even interviewed by Ellen DeGeneres, who invited them on her show once they had gotten better. During a press conference, half of the boys said that they would like to join the Navy SEALs to be like those brave divers. The rest wanted to have a career in soccer. They also offered an apology to their parents for going to the cave without telling anyone about it. When the boys found out about the diver who had died during the operation, they were deeply saddened. Several of them became Buddhist monks and decided to spend some time in a temple. Here's how their coach depicted the moments when he and the boys realized what was going on. We weren't scared. We always had hope that if we don't come out eventually, someone will have to come in and get us out anyway. Soon after they were freed from the cave, the stateless boys and their coach received Thai passports from the government. They met their favorite soccer stars, eventually returning to ordinary life. Here's how their coach described the team's plans. We promise that we will be good citizens to society. We will study and we will love people around the world the same way the whole world loves the 13 of us. Thank you. Write your thoughts about this case in the comments. Did you find the story impressive? Or perhaps there is something you would like to add? Subscribe to my channel so as not to miss new videos, and stay safe.